Some of the most damaging childhood traumas, they don't always happen out in the open. A lot of the time, they happen in plain sight, hidden right inside a family. It's a tough thing to think about. But today, we're going to dive into this powerful framework that helps us make sense of it all. It's a way to understand childhood trauma in general, but it also shines a bright light on one of the most complicated and, frankly, misunderstood forms out there.
So here's how we're going to tackle this. We'll start big, with the discovery of something called ACEs and the science, the actual biology of how trauma can literally rewire a kid's brain. Then we'll zoom in on parental alienation, which, as you'll see, is a hidden kind of trauma, one that doesn't quite fit the typical PTSD box. And we'll wrap up by looking at what it actually takes to heal and, more importantly, how we can prevent this from happening in the first place.
Okay, look at this. 2/3. Just let that sink in for a second. What do you think that represents? This isn't just some random number from a trivia night. Nope, this is a statistic that pretty much turned the world of public health completely upside down. Yeah, that's right. 2 out of every 3 of middle-class, college-educated adults in a major study had gone through at least one significant trauma as a kid. I mean, think about that. This totally blew up the idea that trauma is something that only happens over there, to other people. No. This showed us it's a huge public health crisis and it's hiding in plain sight.
So where did this bombshell statistic come from? Well, it all started with this landmark study from the CDC and Kaiser Permanente. It's called the ACE study, and honestly, it changed everything we thought we knew about how our childhoods connect to our health for the rest of our lives. And what they were looking at were adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs for short. Basically, these are really tough, potentially traumatic things that can happen to a kid anytime from birth to age 17. And it's a wide range, everything from direct abuse and neglect to just witnessing a lot of chaos and dysfunction at home. To measure it, the researchers came up with a simple scoring system, like a checklist, to tally them up.
So the original study zeroed in on 10 specific ACEs. They broke them down into 3 big categories: abuse, neglect, and what they called household dysfunction. And here's the part that was a real wake-up call for a lot of people. Things like a parent's divorce or someone in the house having a substance abuse problem, those were counted as having a traumatic impact, right up there with things we more traditionally think of as abuse.
Okay, but here's where it gets really fascinating. The impact of these ACEs, it's not just in your head. It's not just about having bad memories. It's biological. This stuff literally gets under our skin. Adversity actually changes how our bodies and brains develop on a physical level.
And this is what they call the ACE pyramid. It's like a roadmap showing how this whole thing works. You see, it starts at the bottom with those adverse childhood experiences. That early trauma can then disrupt how the brain develops, which in turn can lead to social, emotional, and cognitive problems. And from there, people are more likely to adopt risky behaviors, which, at the very top of the pyramid, can lead to serious disease, disability, and even a shorter life. It's a tragic domino effect, and it all starts in childhood.
So what's the engine driving all this damage? It's a concept called toxic stress. Look, a little stress is normal, but toxic stress is different. It's what happens when a kid's stress response system, their fight or flight mode, is switched on and just gets stuck there, especially when there isn't a supportive adult around to help them feel safe. This constant flood of stress hormones literally rewires the physical structure, the architecture of their brain as it's growing.
And what the research found was this incredible dose-response relationship. It's a simple idea. The more ACEs you have, the higher your dose of adversity, the higher your risk for all kinds of health problems later on. I mean, look at this. Someone with an ACE score of 4 or more is twice as likely to smoke and 6 times more likely to have a problem with alcohol. A score of 7 or more, 3 times the risk for heart disease. The connection is just, it's undeniable.
All right, so we've got this foundation, right? We understand what ACEs are and how they work. Now let's zoom in and focus on one specific and really insidious form of trauma: parental alienation. And let me be clear, this is so much more than just a messy divorce or a custody battle. This is a severe form of psychological abuse, and the consequences can be absolutely devastating.
So what is it exactly? Well, parental alienation is a process of psychological manipulation, plain and simple. It's where one parent deliberately manipulates a child to turn against the other parent for no good reason. It's absolutely a form of family violence, and the child rejecting that parent isn't a choice. It's the result of this abusive campaign.
And the tactics used are just awful. We're talking about constantly bad-mouthing the other parent, cutting off phone calls, making the child feel like the other parent is dangerous. It's this whole campaign of psychological indoctrination.
In fact, some of the sources for this explainer compare these tactics to the ones used by cult leaders. That's how severe the manipulation and control really is.
And this right here, this is maybe the single most important thing to get. When you see a child acting hostile or rejecting a parent in this situation, that's not a choice they're making. It's a symptom. It's a coping mechanism. It's a complex trauma response to being put in an absolutely impossible situation.
Okay, so if we know it's a trauma response, you might be thinking, so the kid has PTSD, right? Well, not exactly. It's more complicated than that. To really get a handle on the unique psychological wound that alienation leaves, we have to look past PTSD and find a diagnosis that's a much better fit.
And that diagnosis is something called post-traumatic embitterment disorder, or PTED. And when you look at what triggers it, a feeling of grave injustice, a deep sense of betrayal or humiliation, wow, that is a perfect description of what an alienated child is going through.
And the difference between the two is huge. Think about it. PTSD is usually triggered by a life-threatening event, and the main emotion is fear. But PTED, that's triggered by injustice, and the main emotion is embitterment and this burning anger. That constant hostility, those fantasies of revenge, that's PTED. It maps so much more closely to what we see in these kids than PTSD does.
Okay, so we've diagnosed the problem. We understand the what and the why. But that's just the first step. Now, let's zoom back out a bit and talk about solutions. What does a real, evidence-based path to healing actually look like?
So, any attempt to help has to start with a philosophy called trauma-informed care. It's basically a set of principles that all point to one goal: do no further harm. It's all about creating an environment of safety, both physical and psychological, building trust and empowering people instead of re-traumatizing them.
Which leads us to the million-dollar question, right? So what actually works? What does an intervention that helps families recover actually look like?
Well, first, let's talk about what doesn't work. And this is a really tough but crucial point. Just sending the kid to individual therapy is not enough. In fact, most of the time, it's totally ineffective. Why? Because the problem isn't just with the child. The problem is systemic. It's in the family dynamic itself. So the solution has to be systemic too.
Real recovery is a team effort. It's a multi-layered approach. Yes, the child needs help processing their trauma and learning coping skills, but also the family needs safe, structured, and consistent time together to start rebuilding that broken relationship with the targeted parent. And, this is so important, that targeted parent needs help too. They need to shift from feeling like a victim to becoming what we call a skilled and confident therapeutic parent.
And finally, if we're really serious about this, we have to talk about prevention. And preventing ACEs, that's bigger than just one family. It's about our whole society. Think about it. Things like family-friendly work policies, livable wages, access to high-quality childcare. All of these things reduce the massive stress on families that can be the root cause of adversity in the first place.
So that brings us here. If we agree that childhood trauma is a massive public health crisis, and the evidence is overwhelming, then the question really isn't just for experts or therapists. It's for all of us. What's our part to play in building a future that's more resilient and more compassionate for every single kid?